an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Welcome in. Look at that. It's Wednesday, March the 29th. Boy, March is already almost in the rearview mirror. That went by in a blur. Yep, getting all set for opening day baseball. Good fun. As we were talking to Rod Black yesterday about the prospects for the Leafs and the Raptors and the Blue Jays. Got into a discussion, though, around the Hockey Canada scandal and where that stands. And I also think this whole question around the Pride celebrations in the NHL. Noticed this morning when I was watching the sports channels, they're continuing across the league. I think it was Calgary the night before, celebrating, pride at the rink, and so on. And I don't really have an issue with any of that. But again, as Rod and I were talking about it yesterday, you can't name an NHL active player who is out, who is gay. You can name one prospect who's still playing, his way into the league, came out this year, and good on the team, and I can't remember what team now off the top of my head. Clearly, this is not an issue. This is a supportive environment, and away we go. But I'm not a gambling guy, but I'm betting that there's probably, considering the population of, the NHL, 22-odd players per team times 32, there might be a couple of guys who are gay. And over the course in the history of the league, over the last, even let's say the last 10 years, where it has not been viewed as a big deal for, media personalities to come out. They were celebrated for doing so. We've encouraged our kids to feel safe enough to do so and support them. Because let's face it, there has long been a bias, discrimination, all that goes with it, historically. And now when we talk about, same-sex marriage in this country, we talk about the Pride Parade and celebration here in Toronto specifically, the history of the gay community and the police in this community. Yes, there is a very dark history there, but we've come a long way in terms of that relationship, in terms of how culturally we view the Pride celebration. So, nobody's skin crawls because somebody has said, by the way, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm trans, I'm queer. Okay, there's people in my life whom I had no idea, known them a long time. They came out. It has not changed our relationship at all. So we are at least at a point where we've created a culture where this is, I won't say an accepted thing, a supported thing. It's probably a better way to say it. Accepted sounds like it's us and them, and that's not what we want. But I go back to the league. If there are no players who've explicitly come out, now there could be all kinds of reasons why. But surely, you got to think that if it's not happening in the league itself, those who are choosing not to come out, I'm going to guess that part of it is that they just don't feel it's the place to do it. I won't go so far as to say it's not a safe place, but emotionally it may not be a safe place for them to do it. And now I'm speculating, and that's what happens, right? We begin to ask the question. We don't have an obvious answer. We go to what we think is an obvious answer based on other models. Do gay players not come out in the NHL because they don't think the league is there to support them? They don't think that the culture of NHL, professional hockey, the elite league in the world, would support them. Do they feel as though they would be othered by their teammates? But I don't think by their fans. I don't know who. But at some point, I'm guessing, and I fully acknowledge I'm guessing, they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel like this is the place to do it. So to celebrate Pride is okay, that's great. But what is it about the culture in the NHL that makes it stop at putting rainbow tape on a stick during a warm-up? I just asked the question. Rod Black and I discussed that very thing yesterday on Now and Next. So if you want the full brunt of the conversation and, where it all fits in, roll back and listen to the Tuesday edition of Now and Next here for Story Studio Network. I'm Dave Trafford. Welcome to the show. Okay, so today, as of this day, it's the 29th of March, is the day that Toronto City Council will officially vacate the mayor's seat here in Toronto. You know the story by now, and John Tory has stepped down because he had a relationship with a staffer, etc. Now we have, and I've said this already, we've got a lineup of candidates who want to, take the job. And probably, I'm going to say there are about 6 or 7, maybe 8 now. Brad Bradford, the latest to drop his hat in the ring, who have a legitimate shot at winning the mayor's race. And I talked to one guy who's still kind of trying to decide whether he wants to run. And I think he would have a legitimate shot. But he's saying, the next mayor may only get 20% at the most of the voter turnout, of the popular vote. And then if a voter turnout's only 25%, that's not a lot, right? Of people who are actually going to vote for this mayor. So that's a problem right off the bat. But the point is, the field is so broad, nobody's really going to have the ability to break out in front like Tory did, like Rob Ford did, right? Like Mel Lastman did, like David Miller did. I mean, the Miller win was a little tighter, but still. This is different. And it's going to have a real weird effect in terms of how we view this as voters in this city. But also, whoever gets elected as mayor of the city of Toronto on the 26th day of June is probably going to be the mayor for the rest of this decade, given the way incumbency works. So that's one thing. But I think it was interesting, yesterday sat and listened to what was going on just in the background with the budget in Ottawa. And the first thing I thought of was, okay, I'm not hearing what the big story is. This is not an infrastructure budget. It's not a health budget. It's not a, whatever. Usually there's that kind of big meaty thing that you can hang it on. And then there are other programs and things that happen around it. And so it was interesting to hear the commentary the morning after from so many people. It was kind of like this all things to all people, meaning it was meaningless in the grand scheme of things because it really didn't have any vision behind it, didn't have any kind of teeth in it in terms of what we can expect from a liberal government in this country, or how they see this country recovering from the pandemic, how they see this country, blazing a new trail in terms of how we are going to take care of an aging population. I mean, everybody's aging, but the elders in the population, because they're going to represent such a large part of the population. How are we going to make sure that long-term care is taken care of? Whatever it might have been. All the big questions that we had out of the pandemic. I don't think any of them got answered or even addressed. A few $100 for folks who are having a hard time making ends meet to pay for groceries. That's the vision? Really? Now, that's nationally. Here in Toronto, though, what it has done is it's galvanized the mayoral debates, the mayoral race. It will be a situation where every candidate gets to run against the federal government because, more so than the province, it's a safer thing to run against the feds because they got to have a closer relationship with the province. I know they got to work with both levels. But Queen's Park is right in their backyard. That's a relationship that is at the hip. But what's most interesting, and we made this point about, I don't know, a month and a half ago when the whole Tory thing broke, and how this was all going to play out, and what the next mayor was going to have to do. And how do you deal with the other levels of government? We talked about it on The Ledge, our Ontario Politics podcast. It's on Fridays. Keith Leslie, Sabrina Nanji, and John Wright and I kick around the provincial politics of the day. And we noted that every seat, almost every seat in Toronto, is red. It's Liberal red federally. Yet this city is stuck with a nearly $1 billion deficit. And why? Primarily because of projects and services that have been downloaded from the federal government and the provincial government onto Toronto, uniquely, in terms of how they deal with immigration, refugees, all of those things that are so pronounced and accelerated in terms of issues, the growing issue here in Toronto. Where the hell are all the Liberal MPs standing up for this city? Where are they? Where is Chrystia Freeland? The Finance Minister has done nothing for her constituents in that budget. She has done nothing to represent the city of Toronto. Yeah, sure, she might be the Finance Minister of the entire country, but she's an MP from Toronto. Collectively, the Toronto Caucus of Liberals has done sweet dick all. And Doug Ford's got to like to hear that because, you know, he can bang the desk all he wants about the violence on the TTC. Nobody wants to follow up with him and say, okay, what are you doing about this? When are you going to understand that this is a crisis? The focus at City Hall, though, isn't on Doug. Focus at City Hall is on the federal Liberals, which means that this campaign, the narrative, a lot of it is going to be yelling and screaming at the federal government to see exactly what they can get out of them. And can they get the Liberals, the federal Liberals, the MPs in the city to stand up for the city of Toronto? I'm not a betting guy, but I'm going to take the under on that. Okay, so I had this really cool opportunity to chat with some folks at the University of Ottawa, particularly at the Faculty of Law. If you are a regular listener to this show, you will have met and heard Ritesh Kotak. He is our cybersecurity strategist. He's just this incredibly smart guy, and he is just immersed in this the cyber space specifically. But he's also newly called to the bar as a lawyer and a grad of the University of Ottawa's law faculty. Last year, he and I were talking, and in fact, we had him on the podcast to talk more about it. He and a couple of his colleagues at the school, classmates, they created a virtual reality moot court. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Everybody is involved in the moot court, and this is an exercise for law students to argue in front of judges and so on a real case, not a real case, but the case that would be based on whatever law and so on that they've learned to date. Normally, you'd do that in a large hall or a classroom at the university, whatever. What they did was they recreated the interior of a courtroom. They had 3 justices sitting on the bench, and it's all virtual. And I say virtual reality, not like you're on a Zoom call. This is, you put the goggles on and you are immersed in that space. So you can see the other lawyers, you can see the people in the gallery, you can see the court clerk, you can see the jury box, you can see the judges, you can see your co-counsel, whatever. And you're not in the same room. You sit in your own space with your goggles on, and you conduct the case. And it's really kind of cool. Well, when they first introduced it, of course, it was, well, this is kind of new, and we'll see how it goes. While it was so successful, they launched the second version just this past week. And the things that they've learned in the meantime were pretty interesting in terms of how this is actually teaching law students to be better lawyers. And I know it's almost sounds counterintuitive, but it will get you involved in the conversation here. So for the sake of this conversation, I had a chance to sit down with Kristen Boone. She is the dean at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. Aram Ibrahimi is the law student who was on the winning side of the moot court. And Ritesh Kotak, of course, he is the brains behind all of this, joined us to talk about it. And I pointed out to Dean Boone that, at some point, somebody had to look at this and say, this might sound a little gimmicky, but maybe we should try this.
When I joined the faculty last year, it was right around the time that the first moot was taking place, and Ritesh was the organizer. He was really the student with a group of others who came up with this incredible idea to host this moot in the metaverse. And the buzz around it was fantastic. It was an immersive experience where students came together with their VR goggles on and were able to argue a case before a panel of judges in a virtual courtroom. They all had avatars. They had a moot, which is a mock trial, which is something that we do at the law school quite regularly to train advocacy. And yeah, it was a total splash, a real success. And so I was thrilled when Ritesh approached me about continuing this program. My understanding is that this is a 5-year project now, and the law firm that he works at has agreed to sponsor this going forward.
So how does this go from sounding like a cool gimmick to something that's a really vital, usable tool that has a place in the justice system?
So it does sound gimmicky, but in fact, it's immersive and very realistic because the students go into a virtual courtroom and there's a real sense of formality about it. They sit at tables. They stand up when they're addressing the judges, and so it gives them an opportunity to really transform themselves into advocates in the virtual classroom or virtual courtroom. Pardon me. And it's really interesting because it reflects open court principles, I would say as well too. It's a way of making this accessible for students no matter where they are. All you need is the headsets really to get in and to participate.
So Aram, where were you when you presented to the court? Where were you really?
I was really, I was just sitting in an empty little room, and it wasn't even like a classroom that was big. It was like a little room the size of a shoebox. And we were just sitting there with our virtual headsets on, just speaking like we were actually in a courtroom standing before 3 justices. And it was very immersive. Like it felt very real.
I watched the video afterwards, and now I could see, people in the courtroom who were watching what was going on. I could see the judges when the camera panned. I could see the lawyers who were arguing the case. What could you see based on what was accessible through the goggles you were wearing?
For sure. So for me, the way that I could see it was I could see everything that was directly in front of me. And then if I turned my head, it was like I was literally turning my head in an actual courtroom. So I was kind of like making sure that for that eye contact, kind of for the judges, I was making sure that I was looking at them and not like staring at the ground. Because if I stared at the ground, my avatar also stared at the ground. So I was trying to make sure that I had that like proper courtroom presence without actually being in the courtroom physically.
Ritesh, you and I talked about this last year when you launched it, and with the whole idea of this body language in the court became so much more pronounced because, it's as Aram talks about, the idea that if I'm looking down, which is what we're most likely to do at my notes or just kind of listening to what's going on, the judges on the bench can see that I'm not paying attention, that I'm looking down. So all of a sudden, it might have been more of a tool in terms of self-awareness than you might have otherwise thought.
Yeah, and it kind of blows people away when they actually get into that space, and there you are, you put on the headset, and it's not just the fact that you can get that 360 view, like you're physically in that courtroom. The other element of this is there's also 3D sound that gets built into it. So if somebody behind you says something, it actually feels like somebody behind you is saying something. And if when you actually watch the video, because it was live streamed and then uploaded onto YouTube as well, and I encourage everyone to go ahead and watch it, you will actually see, and there's one instance where Justice Wadalove says asks a question and Justice Leon responds. And when he responded, everybody, their head turned to their left of where he was actually seated. Now, mind you, they were all in different rooms. It was spread across. We even had members of the gallery from BC all the way to Ireland, believe it or not. And everyone turned their head. And the reason for that is the way the system is made. That's the way the platform's been developed. There's a sense of realism. Clearly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done with respect to facial expressions, hand gestures, because you are holding these two controllers in your hand. It gets actually pretty funny if you cross those controllers. Kind of makes you look like a contortionist. But other than that, it was very realistic. And that was my tell, is when everyone turned to the left and looked at Justice Leon. I was like, all right, this is working.
It's funny you should talk about the hand gestures, and I think again that's that awareness of where your body is at any one point. But I realized that there were sort of affectations that weren't necessarily part of the presentation. It had more to do with the technology. Dean Boone, when we looked at the learnings here, and I realized that there are some high level benefits. What are the things? Where are the gaps that you really think that if you can close these gaps, this is going to accelerate the use of virtual reality and access to the courts?
Well, we're always looking for innovative ways to improve the student experience. And even over the course of year one of the moot and year two of the moot was interesting because the problem this year was a contract law problem, and it involved a question of digital evidence. And as we talk about what future problems might look at, Ritesh is proposing that one thing that we might do in the future is to have the judges be able to transport themselves into a crime scene, for example, or go into a workplace to witness an incident. And so it's there are lots of gaps, but it's quite exciting to think about where we might go next. At the University of Ottawa, we have a fantastic law and technology program, and so we're using this technology now to really bridge gaps in the classroom with regards to the student experience. But I think the possibilities are really infinite as to where we go with this.
I suspect the two issues that occurred to me, and this is just from the civilian eye, is the presentation of physical evidence and being able to look at that. And I just throw it to the group, and how do we? At some point, I have to be able to touch it. I have to be able to feel it. There's going to be parts of that are sensory. So being disconnected as much and all as it's immersive is still a challenge, no? Ritesh?
Yes, look, you'll never be able to replicate real world in virtual world. However, what we did in this case was, as Dean Boone mentioned, it was a contract law problem that dealt with sneakers. Are these sneakers authentic? Are they collectible? Was kind of at the forefront. It was a sale gone horribly wrong, or horribly, or actually pleasantly right, depending on which side of the argument you sat on. But what was really interesting here was we actually went out and purchased a pair of sneakers. Actually, we purchased some Air Jordans. And I think this was just an excuse for me to get a new pair of sneakers, actually. So that's a whole other side story. But what we did was we actually created a exact replica in 3D that was then uploaded as a digital artifact onto the platform. That sneaker was to scale. You could literally hold it, you could feel it, you could move it. Pretty soon you'll be able to do even more things with it. For example, open it up, look at the construction of it, zoom in on labels, and you can clone it. Once it's created once, you can literally clone that artifact, so every judge can touch it at the same time. Every person in that courtroom could have access to it. And we're already seeing elements of this kind of play out in real world, mainly from a crime scene perspective. Police services are using drones and 3D cameras to capture everything from fatalities to homicide scenes. Where this is being used by different ministries for workplace incident reconstruction as well. So the technology is advancing. There are definite benefits to it, but will it ever replicate the physical world? No, but it might actually enhance it in some cases.
Aram, how did you prepare for this, knowing that there was going to be sort of this ability to be immersed in the courtroom, but at the same time, you're in a digital space?
For sure. So the way that I kind of wanted to approach it was still giving that courtroom presence and kind of because mock trials essentially, as much as it is about the law, it's also about kind of putting on a show and making sure that you're portraying your side and that your side comes out on top. So for me, I'm a very expressive person, and we were in that shoebox sized room, as I mentioned. So we were sitting in chairs as we were doing it, and I was like, I need to watch what I'm doing with my hands. I don't want to fling this controller and then just smack right into the wall, because I think that would completely just kind of kill the vibe. So I was trying to be very aware of my surroundings, sitting while still being expressive, using my hands kind of to make sure that I'm giving that presence to the judges, and that I was still able to remember the exhibits, as you mentioned, not having the physical documents, not being able to take off that headset mid presentation and kind of look at my exhibits, look at my notes. So I was trying to make sure that I was well prepared. I knew everything that I needed to know in case I was asked a question. I could think exhibit one was the contract, so I'll think back to that. So definitely a lot of preparation, but I wouldn't change a thing about it.
Yeah, I would think that all of a sudden it's a different muscle that you're developing to some degree, in as much as being required to remember and memorize and have a really, solid understanding of what the resources are, what the arguments on both sides are, the specific language that would be used, and not being able to refer to notes. I think in some ways is probably a good discipline.
Absolutely. I was thinking if I knew that I could rely on my physical notes, I mean, the reality is I certainly wouldn't have spent as much time preparing. I wouldn't spend as much time remembering the points that I for sure want to raise, because I would have that like fallback. I would say, okay, well, I have my physical notes in front of me, like no problem, gravy, easy as gravy. But knowing that I can't just take that headset off and have my avatar poof out of court, because that would just destroy everything. So it definitely made me prepare more. And I think that it can be argued that that way it made me kind of present better and be a better advocate in some ways.
So, Dean Boone, it sounds like we're making better lawyers through the virtual reality.
Absolutely. I think it's a really great advocacy tool for students to do this. We have a world-class mooting program at the University of Ottawa, but this literally brings it to a new metaverse.
Now, specifically, I realize that there are, stages, and you're going to take your 5-year program. But realistically, at what point do you think that this will become sort of common usage across the justice system?
I'm not sure that it's going to be ubiquitous, but I think it's going to be a really helpful additional tool. We do a lot of moot courts that just involve standard advocacy where students argue in person. What this does is it really enables, it uses technology to enable students to experience things differently. I mean, I think, at the beginning, it was quite expensive to have this kind of technology, but now it's becoming more and more common to provide it. And so we're trying to integrate it where appropriate into the curriculum. I'd be interested in Ritesh's view on this as well too, given that he's the developer of the whole move.
Well, so my personal take on this is, are we going to see judges as avatars and people flying around in courtrooms? And no, probably not. However, what I do think, and this is going to happen a lot sooner than I think most people realize, is there's going to be this hybrid model. So clearly, this technology is great, as Dean Boone talked about, for training, for getting people into what it feels like to be in a courtroom. Many law students don't actually get to see the inside of a courtroom till they're articling. So the fact that you can physically be there, yes, it does make for better advocates. As Aram said, she had to memorize her lines and focus on her oral advocacy. Well, it does make, and that does make better advocates. But what does this mean for the future? I truly think the hybrid model is going to be this, where you're going to have physical trials, but what's going to happen is one side is going to say, Your Honor, I'd like to move to digital or virtual exhibit A. And at that point, everyone's going to pop on the headsets and be transported into that collision reconstruction, that workplace incident, have that piece of 3D evidence, which is a exact replica, where both sides could then argue their position and say, actually, this is what happened. No, this is what happened. You could change around elements of it as well. And that in itself does speak to access to justice. It does speak to having a more efficient court system. Think about how expensive it would be to physically take somebody to a particular scene. Imagine how expensive it would be to have even having 3D video and having all these experts trying to explain, and you have a battle of the experts, when in actuality, you could virtually transport individuals right into that particular scene, and judges for themselves can see, this doesn't make any sense, or okay, this makes absolute sense to me. That is what I think is going to happen in the next few years. It's going to just take one defense attorney to say, this is what I want to try. But there is an appetite to look at new innovative technology, especially now in this era that we're living in, where technology adoption isn't something of the past. It is something that's been ingrained into the profession, always looking at new ways of leveraging tech. And this is a prime example, and I believe is at the forefront and will continue to develop. But that's what I think. The hybrid model is the future.
Well, and I expect that there's an advantage when you get into a jury trial as well, being able to immerse a juror into a specific situation as opposed to having it explained or related to them. Aram, what's your lane in terms of your view and how you will specialize in law?
Definitely. I mean, I think that, so do you mean in terms of what type of law I'd like to practice?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I mean, at the moment, the 1L courses are very diverse. So it's kind of from public constitutional to criminal to property. And I think that property is where I really have been enjoying it. We touched on like real estate or IP, real property. So, I mean, I think property I'm really interested in, but I do want to kind of try and see what the business corporate side also entails.
I know
And take those specialized ones.
some students who've gone through law school, and they say, well, I'm really not interested in being in a courtroom. I just, I have my focus is on law elsewhere. But as soon as they have the moot experience, sometimes it flips that switch. Now, had you already determined that you wanted to litigate cases in court, or had thinking elsewhere, or did that kind of affect that view of it?
So I came into it. I remember getting the email and it was like VR moot, like sign up by this date. And me and my partner were like, let's do it. Amazing. So, because I was like, I do not want to be a litigator. The courtroom, I love speaking, and I love advocating, but I just think there's so many like additional nerves added to like physically standing there and like presenting your case and like being interrupted by judges. Like it's such a daunting experience, like as exciting as it is. So I went into this moot. It was my first ever moot. I went into it thinking I don't want to be a litigator. And honestly, I can't say that I came out of it with a hard yes or a hard no. I think that it definitely opened my eyes, and I'm more interested now, to be honest. Like I'm considering doing moot tryouts maybe this September. So it definitely opened an interest.
So Dave,
Go
if
ahead.
if I may, and Aram said something that just triggered uh something. And here's the thing: is that I was talking to developers in the VR space, and we talk about practicing. We talk about oral advocacy, the fact that the moot actually happened. One of the ideas that they proposed to me, which I found really interesting, was with all this Chat GPT stuff that we've been talking about. Is it possible to create artificial judges in VR? So if you want to practice, you can actually go in and practice by yourself, and get real time feedback, get real time questions, get real time, um, just everything real time, but it's artificially generated. And it was really interesting in a sense that in the beginning I was like, no, that will not. I don't know if that's a thing. But the more I thought about it, if we really are trying to develop the future. The future of the profession and help have people fine tune their skills. Imagine the combination of when we start talking about virtual reality or extended reality, digital evidence, practicing your advocacy, and then you add that element of AI into it. This is going to be a very exciting space to watch. Clearly, there's going to be questions around the ethical implications of this, which we need to talk about, the legal implications, the privacy related implications. But the fact that this can now be done and we're having these conversations is what's really important.
Just before we go, then, Dean Boone, I'll probably put you on the spot by asking you this question, but based on what Ritesh has just said, it almost sounds as if the Faculty of Law is going to have to actually create, and doesn't, not just in Ottawa, but right across the board, where we're going to need a specific practice of law that deals with things like the digital space, AI, very thoroughly, as opposed to drawing on other areas of law to bring it in, because it's going to have its own unique imprint on how, we create legislation and how we, set up and run businesses.
Well, I think, there's a lot that's going to stay the same in terms of legal practice, but certainly we're looking at where there are gaps and where we need to develop new applications or new new concepts. I mean, an example of that would be contract law, which has tended to be a very stable area of law, but then all of a sudden you have smart contracts, which we all have become used to signing as we, it gets up. So then we have to look at, what are the implications for contract law of having all these digital mechanisms of demonstrating offer and acceptance. So at the Faculty of Law, because we have such a strong law and tech program, and we offer courses in coding and artificial intelligence and so forth. I think that we are at the forefront, but we're always looking for new applications, new ways to bring students in, because we really want to ensure that our graduates have very strong technological competencies.
Listen, this is fascinating. I'm going to share the link to the YouTube video in the show notes for this episode. So for those of you who are listening and want to watch, you can find it in the show notes. Thanks for being here. This is fun.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, my thanks to Ritesh Kotak and Aram Ibrahimi, along with Kristen Boone. She is the Dean at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. Yes, and I'm going to include that link. As I said, it's in the show notes. You want to check it out on the YouTube. You can see how this all works out. And sure, there's maybe a little clunky here and there, but to Ritesh's point, there are all kinds of things that they're going to be able to do now that they've mastered this and opened the door to the possibility, whether it is bringing witnesses in remotely. And as he said, you might be able to take judge and jury to the crime scene. Just kind of a fascinating thing all around. So again, I'll put the link to that video that replays the whole thing and explains it all. It's in the show notes. So just go to the show notes right below. Yeah, right there. There you go. And you'll find the link. Okay, that'll do it for me for this Wednesday, March the 29th. Dave Trafford here for Now and Next. Tomorrow will be Feed Drop Thursday, and I've got a few options there. I'm digging through the library, but we might go into the archives, and we've got some really good shows that are sitting on Story Studio Network. And just trust me, tomorrow I'll have a brand new opportunity for you to dip into some of the cool programs that we're working on at Story Studio Network. Talk to you then. Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.